The cradle released. For one moment, nothing happened, and that was the wrong detail. A cradle releasing a ship that size should have shaken the sensor feeds, should have sent vibration signatures through the mass shadow readings, should have done something. Instead, silence, the kind of silence that meant every dampener on the hull was working exactly as designed. Then the lights came on, not all at once. From stern to bow, in a slow sequence that took 11 seconds, sections powering up as the dreadnought pulled itself free of the scaffolding that had held it for 17 years. 11 seconds felt very long when you were watching it happen from 4,200 kilometers away. Scout Commander T-Car had been watching for 43 seconds total before he remembered to breathe. He filed his report. He flagged it urgent. He marked it impossible. He was right about two of those things. I can tell you there was a moment before it all changed, when the galaxy still believed it understood what humanity was. I'll be honest with you. I almost believed it too. Stay close. What comes next is the part I still think about. 3 days earlier, the Galactic Council's morning session opened with 346 members present and one agenda item: the vote on whether to dispatch a survey ship to the Sol Fringe, where a scout had filed a sensor report that no one in the chamber had taken seriously. The chamber itself was older than most of the civilizations currently seated in it. The crystal ceiling had been installed in the second millennium of the institution's existence. The vote was 346 to 12. High Counselor Vexarath had not voted with the minority. He was 3,200 years old. He had sat in the Council's great ring chamber for longer than some species had possessed writing. And the blue haze that drifted through the upper tiers was a byproduct of the atmospheric processors that had been running, without interruption, for 9,000 years. The smell of the place was ozone and old paper, and the particular dry cold of recycled air that has been cleaned so many times it no longer carries anything organic. Vexarath had voted no on the survey, not because he had reviewed T-Car's data, because he had not reviewed it. He had not reviewed it because a junior scout sensor report from the outer Sol Fringe was not the kind of thing that required review. Humanity had been part of the galactic family for 400 years. They were cataloged, they were classified, they were understood. A primitive species did not build a dreadnought. That was not opinion, that was record. Carr stood at the edge of the council floor and waited to be called on. He had been waiting for 2 hours. He was 89 years old, not young, by his species count, and he had served the Survey Corps for 61 of those years, and in 61 years he had never filed a report marked impossible. His hands were not steady. He had pressed them flat against his thighs so that no one would notice, but the data packet he was carrying, a physical slate, because he did not trust the transmission, was sweating where his palms pressed it. He had seen the feeds. He had reviewed them 4 times on the journey back. He had run the sensor calibration check twice. The array had never been wrong. 62 kilometers. He had measured it 3 times. He had run the shape analysis against every known hull configuration in the Council's database. Nothing matched. The database had 14,000 entries. Nothing matched because the database had been built on the assumption that no species without Council authorization would build something at that scale, and so nothing at that scale had ever needed to be entered. The 12 who had voted with him were already gone. He was the only one left on the floor. Vexarath's aide leaned down to whisper something in the counselor's ear. Vexarath listened. He did not change his expression. It was the face of a man who had not needed to change his expression in centuries. He glanced at T-Car, at the slate in his hands. "Present your findings," Vexarath said. Not warmly, with the boredom of an institution that had heard everything. T-Car stepped forward. He placed the slate on the data surface. The readings populated the chamber's central display, the enormous curved screen that could render a star map in real time. The shepherd silhouette filled it. 62 kilometers of hull, lights along the spine. A power reading that had made the array's auto-calibration routine restart 3 times because it couldn't reconcile the number with anything in its reference set. The chamber was quiet. Vexarath looked at the display for exactly 4 seconds. Then he looked back at his papers. "They don't even have a fleet worthy of the name," he said. "This is a civilian habitat project. File it and move on." Tar opened his mouth. He closed it. He picked up the slate. He did not file it and move on. He did not leave the ring station. He went to the communications bay and sent a copy of the data to every survey officer with a Sol Fringe posting. He flagged it as unresolved. He marked it for follow-up in 48 hours. The 48-hour flag would never trigger. On Meridian Station, the alert arrived at 0312 local time. Not because she was anxious, she had been anxious about Project Shepherd for approximately 15 of its 17 years, and she had used up most of that feeling somewhere around year 9. Admiral Isara Kalin was already awake. She had not slept more than 5 hours in any night for the past 3 weeks, when the keel sections had locked into place and the construction had crossed the point where it could still be quietly dismantled. The mug had his name written on the side in permanent marker, because Vasquez had a habit of leaving his mugs in conference rooms and never getting them back, and she had kept it specifically because he had written his name on it. After year 9, she had stopped being anxious and started being patient. She was drinking black coffee from a mug that had been a gift from Chief Engineer Vasquez when the frame sections cleared final weld inspection 4 years ago. And because it reminded her that the man who had spent 22 years building the most ambitious piece of human engineering in history still worried about his coffee going missing. The alert read, Council Dispatchage, Survey Delegation, Sol Fringy, Arrival Estimate, 19 hours. She read it twice. She set the mug down. She reached into the pocket of her worn leather jacket, the one from her first posting, gray at the sleeves, too warm for the station's climate control, and exactly warm enough for her, and touched the folded parchment there. 47 names. 17 years of work. She had carried it since the first keel was laid. The paper had softened with handling until the fold lines no longer made sharp creases. She did not take it out. She just touched it. Then she pulled up the tactical display, 12 meters of real-time positioning, updated every 4 seconds, showing Sol System Fringe in blue and the approaching survey signatures in yellow, and opened a channel to Jupiter's mass shadow. Chief Vasquez, she said. Shepherd's status, there was a pause, not a long one. She could hear in the background of the channel the sound of Section 42, the particular low harmonic of a power core at pre-activation idle. The sound that meant 17 years of construction were sitting at the edge of being done. She's ready, Vasquez said. He sounded like a man saying something simple. He was saying the most complicated thing either of them had ever worked toward. Good, Kalin said. Stand by. She closed the channel. She picked up the coffee. She did not drink it. Commander Reyes knocked twice and entered without waiting. She had told her staff years ago that a knocked then open door was more efficient than a knocked then waited one, and Reyes had internalized this completely. The survey delegation is Korath-led, Reyes said. She did not look at her notes when she said this. She had read the dispatch 3 times on the way down the corridor. Admiral Zorath is listed as delegation commander. Kalin looked at the tactical display. The yellow marks were still 19 hours out. She calculated, not for the first time, the distance between the survey delegation's approach vector and the nearest point at which the Shepherd's emergence would be visible to long-range sensors. How long has Zorath been serving? She asked. 412 years, 9 campaigns. Confident meant they had decided before they launched what they were going to find when they arrived, a construction project in violation of Council classification standards, run by a species that would comply when told to. 4 systems, Reyes paused. He has never been defeated. No, Kalin said. He hasn't. She turned back to the display. The yellow marks moved at their standard approach speed, which meant whoever had dispatched them was confident. Because that was what primitive species did when a 412-year military admiral showed up with a survey delegation. She touched the jacket pocket again. Briefly. Wake Lieutenant Hara, she said, and get Morrison up from the yard. I want him in the war room. Reyes nodded and left. Kalin finished the coffee. It had gone cold while she was thinking. She drank it anyway. Outside the station's viewport, the Sol Fringe was dark and unremarkable, the particular dark of outer system where the sun was a bright star and the planets were suggestions. She had stood at this viewport 100 times in the last 3 weeks, not because she needed to see anything but because the view helped her think, and thinking had been the majority of her job for 17 years. The survey delegation was 19 hours away. The Shepherd had been ready for 6 months. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and now that it was here, she noticed the thing she had not expected to notice, the complete absence of the feeling she had expected. No relief, no fear, no triumph, just the quiet of someone who had finished a calculation and was waiting for the result to confirm itself. She went to find Hara. Lieutenant Hara was already in the corridor when Kalin found her. She had her slate under one arm and her boot was tapping, not from impatience. Kaylin had learned in 6 years of working with her, but from the particular kind of nervous energy that Hara converted into focus the way a reactor converts fuel. The tapping meant she was thinking fast. It was a tell she had never managed to stop and had eventually stopped trying to stop. I pulled Zorath's campaign record, Hara said, falling into step, all 9. His last 4 engagements, the species on the receiving end of 3 of them, are now classified as technology restricted. The 4th was absorbed into Council territory. I know his record. I know you know. I'm telling you, because the way he runs a delegation is the same as the way he runs a campaign. He announces the terms. He expects compliance. He does not leave room in his timeline for a counter-argument. She paused. He will arrive in 17 hours now. He will want a response within 6 of arrival. Kaylin nodded. He'll get one. Hara's boot stopped tapping. That was the other tell. The tapping stopped when something surprised her. She did not ask what the response would be. She had worked with Kaylin long enough to understand that questions asked in the corridor at 0400 did not receive useful answers. They reached the war room. Commander Reyes had the display running, yellow marks crawling towards Soul Fringe, the positioning data updating every 4 seconds in the lower right corner. Morrison was already there, standing against the far wall with his arms crossed, wearing the same work coat he always wore on the yard. He smelled of machine oil and cold metal. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent most of his life with his hands inside the structure of a ship that no one outside this room was supposed to know existed. Morrison, Kaylin said. Admiral. He nodded once. Vasquez said to tell you Section 42 is sealed. Nobody in or out without your authorization. Good. She looked at the display. The yellow marks. The red tags she had not added yet, because Zorath's fleet was still classified as a survey delegation, and she was precise about the difference between a survey and a fleet until the moment she wasn't. Put up the Shepherd's current position, she said. Rays entered the command. A white marker appeared at Jupiter's mass shadow, not moving, not running, just sitting in the middle of the display where no marker should have been, according to every council database. Nobody said anything for a moment. Morrison looked at it the way he always looked at things he had built, not with pride exactly, but with the specific satisfaction of a man who had measured something twice and found it correct. 17 years, he said quietly. It was not a complaint. 17 years, Kaylin agreed. The Council's ring station received Takar's unauthorized data copies 6 hours after he sent them, not because the transmission was slow. Because the receiving officer, a young Valley clerk named Sari, on her first posting, had flagged it as anomalous and sent it up 2 chain levels before anyone with enough rank to act on it actually looked at it. The 2 chain levels took 6 hours. This was not unusual. The Council's administrative apparatus had been refined over millennia into something very efficient at processing expected information and very slow at routing unexpected information to someone who could do something about it. Ambassador Lisai received a copy of Tikar's data at 618 station time. She was 89 years old, which put her by Valley reckoning somewhere in early middle age. She was small. Her species ran small, which was part of why the Council's chamber always felt so large to her, all those seats built for species with larger frames. She had been watching humanity for 17 years, which was not unusual for a Valley ambassador. Her species observed carefully before speaking, and they spoke rarely, and when they did, they tended to be right. She read Tikar's data twice. She looked at the sensor feeds for a long time. Then she set the slate down on her desk and looked out the viewport at the Council's ring, the enormous curve of it against the dark, and she thought about a briefing she had attended on Earth 17 years ago. She had been one of 3 non-human observers invited. The briefing had been in a room with no windows. A man she did not know had stood at a display and shown them a schematic, not a weapon system, not a defense array, but a ship, a very large ship. She had asked what it was for. Admiral Kaylin, younger then, less gray, wearing the same jacket, had said. A rival Lisai had not spoken about it since. Not to the Council, not to her own government. She had waited to see what humanity would choose. She was still waiting. But the timeline had narrowed considerably. She sent a message to Kaylin's open diplomatic channel. The message read, "Ready when you are." She did not explain what she was ready for. She had not needed to explain things to Kaylin in several years. Zorath's delegation arrived in 14 hours, not 17. He had pushed the approach speed not by much, but enough to signal that he was not interested in letting the other party feel comfortable with the timeline. It was the same thing he did at the opening of every campaign, every negotiation, every situation where he held the larger force. Arrival early meant the terms were already decided. His ship was a command cruiser, not large by council standards, but trimmed and fast, smelling of old iron and the particular cold of recycled air that had been through too many combat scrubbers. He had not brought the fleet yet. That came in the second message, if the first one was not answered correctly. He opened the channel from orbit. Admiral Kalin, his voice was level. Not threatening. He did not need to be threatening. The math did all the threatening that needed doing. I represent the Galactic Council in the matter of unauthorized construction activity in the Sol system. You will cease all activity at the construction site immediately. You will provide full access to all personnel and schematics. You will accept reclassification of the Sol system's industrial capacity under Council oversight. He paused. One beat. You have 24 hours. In the war room, Hara's boot was tapping. Reyes looked at Kalin. Morrison looked at the white marker on the display. She was looking at the 37 white tags in the Sol Fringe Earth's defensive fleet, what there was of it, and at the yellow tags of Zoreth's current ship. Kalin was looking at the display too, but she was not looking at the white marker, and at the place on the display where the fleet that would come with the second message would appear if she did not answer correctly. She said nothing. She picked up her mug, empty. She had forgotten to refill it, and looked at it, and set it back down. We're not answering, she said. Reyes nodded. Once. Hara's boot went still for a moment, then resumed. Morrison said nothing at all. Get me Vasquez, Kalin said. Section 42 was the deepest part of the Shepherd's Cradle assembly. The section closest to the keel, where the original weld teams had worked in rotation for the first 4 years before the hull sections grew large enough to require separate crews. Vasquez had worked in Section 42 for 22 years. He knew every weld in it. He could navigate it without lights, which he occasionally did when the power ran to the core diagnostic systems and the section lighting dropped to minimal. He picked up Kalin's channel on the second ping. She's still ready, he said, before she could ask. I know, she said. Vasquez, what does it feel like? He was quiet for a moment. She heard Section 42 in the background, the harmonic of the idle core, the sound of the ship at rest. You know that feeling, he said, when you've been building something for so long that it starts to feel like a thing you're maintaining rather than a thing you're making? And then you finish it and it goes back to being new. Yes, it feels like that. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Stand by on the emergence protocol. If Zoreth sends a second message, we don't wait for the deadline. Understood. She closed the channel. In the corner of the display, the yellow tags updated. Zoreth's ship had settled into a standard holding orbit 400 kilometers up, positioned for maximum sensor coverage of the inner Sol system. He had not detected Jupiter's mass shadow yet. He would. The second message came in 6 hours, not 24. 6. Hara saw it first, her slate lit, and she looked at it and the tapping stopped entirely, which Kalin had learned meant something worse than fast thinking. He's brought the fleet, Hara said. On the display, the yellow tags multiplied, not slowly, all at once, as the Council's sensor dampeners dropped and Zoreth chose to let them be seen. The fleet had been following at a distance, holding position outside Sol Fringe sensor range, and now they stepped into the light. Kalin counted without meaning to, then made herself stop. The number didn't matter. What mattered was what they represented. A council that had decided, before sending anyone to talk, what the answer would need to be. What are they expecting us to say? Morrison asked. He was still against the wall. He had not moved in hours. His arms were still crossed. They're expecting us to say nothing, Kalin said. Or to say yes. And we're saying, she was already opening the Vasquez channel. Wake the shepherd, she said. The war room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a thing that has been building for a very long time finally starts. On the council ring station, Ambassador Lisai was still at her viewport when her slate lit with a new signal, not from Kalin, not from T-Car, but from the council's own long-range array. A contact report. Sol Fringe, Jupiter mass shadow. Something had moved. The signal had no classification tag because the array's classification system had no category for what the sensor profile was describing. It tried 3 times to assign one and failed. It had never failed before. The contact report sat in the system flagged as unresolved, waiting for a human or something like one to tell it what it was looking at. Lisai read the contact report. She read it twice, the same way she had read T-Car's data. She set the slate on her desk. She sat down. She had waited 17 years to see what humanity would choose, and now she understood that she had misframed the question. It was not what they would choose. It was whether they were ready. The answer, it appeared, was yes. The Council's array sent 3 more contact reports in the next 4 minutes. Each one failed to classify. Each one sat in the unresolved queue beside the first, a growing stack of things the system had no language for. The array had been operational for longer than most of the species currently seated in the Council's chamber had existed as spacefaring civilizations. It had classified 4 million distinct contacts in that time. It had never failed 4 times in a row. On Zorath's command cruiser, his sensor officer said something quiet and urgent that made Zorath turn from the tactical display he had been studying and cross the bridge in 4 steps. He looked at the feed. He looked at it for a long time. "Send to all fleet elements," he said. "Hold position." In the war room on Meridian Station, Hara's boot had stopped tapping entirely. She was standing at the edge of the display, her slate in one hand, and she was watching the Shepherd's white marker begin to move for the first time in 17 years. The marker moved slowly, not because the ship was slow, but because the distance involved made even large motion look gradual at this scale. Jupiter's mass shadow to the Sol fringe was a long way. The Shepherd was covering it. "They've gone to hold position," Reyes said, reading from the fleet tracking. "Zorath's ships, none of them are moving." "Good," Kalen said. "Is it?" Morrison asked. He was watching the display too. His arms were no longer crossed. A fleet that doesn't move when something appears on their sensors isn't standing down. It's waiting to see what it is before it decides what to do. He was right, and everyone in the room knew it. And no one said so. Kalen looked at the white marker. She looked at the red tags. She looked at the 37 white tags that were Earth's actual fleet, positioned between the approaching Shepherd and the waiting Council ships. "Hera," she said. "Pull up Zorath's approach modeling. Where does his optimal engagement range begin?" Hera pulled it up. She did not say the number out loud. She showed Kalen the display instead, highlighting the band of space where Zorath's fleet would have clean firing solutions at full power, before the Shepherd got close enough that the math changed. Kalen studied the highlighted band. She studied the Shepherd's current vector. She did the math without writing it down. "He has a window," she said. "About 40 minutes. If he uses it..." Reyes started. "He won't," Kalen said. "He's a campaign admiral. He needs a target that makes sense to fire on." "The Shepherd is unarmed." The room went still. "It is," Kalen said to the silence. "It was never built with weapons." "That was the point. You can't call a ship a threat if it has no way to threaten you." She looked at Morrison. "How many people know that?" "The construction teams," Morrison said. "Vasquez, you, me." He thought about it. 47 people who signed the charter. "Not Zorath," she said. "Not the Council." Morrison looked at the display. He looked at the white marker moving slowly through the dark. "They're going to find out," he said. "Yes," Kalen said. High Counselor Vexzerath received the package at his station in the main chamber, where he had been reviewing trade classification requests, the ordinary work of a 9,000-year institution. They are. On the Council ring station, the unresolved contact reports had finally escalated high enough to reach someone with enough authority to act on them. The kind of work that made up most of every day regardless of what else was happening in the galaxy. His aide handed him the slate without comment, which was how his aide handled things that did not yet have a category. Vexzerath read the contact reports. All 4 of them. He read T-Car's original data, which was attached. He read the sensor profile that the array had failed to classify. He set the slate down. He picked up his tea. It had gone cold while he was reading, which he noticed distantly, and set it back down without drinking it. He had dismissed rumors about human construction from 400 years, not because he was careless. Because the pattern was always the same. A species at humanity's stage of development would generate occasional wild sensor reports from poorly calibrated equipment, inexperienced observers, or deliberate disinformation designed to inflate their apparent capacity. The Council had seen it hundreds of times. The protocol was always the same. Send a survey delegation, find the discrepancy, recatalog, move on. He had sent a survey delegation. He was looking at the contact reports. The protocol had not accounted for this. He sent for T-Car. Takar arrived in 11 minutes, which meant he had been waiting somewhere nearby, which meant he had known this moment was coming and had positioned himself for it, which was either very smart or very presumptuous, and Vexarath found he was no longer certain which. "You filed this report 6 days ago," Vexarath said. "Yes, you marked it impossible. Yes, you were correct about the filing. You were wrong about the assessment." Vexarath looked at the display above his station, where the unresolved contact tags were now visible on the main chamber's tracking board. Visible to everyone present, not just to him. It is not impossible. "It is there." Takar said nothing. He had learned in 89 years when not to speak. "What is the status of Zorath's fleet?" Vexarath asked. "Holding position. No engagement orders have been issued." "Why not?" "We don't know yet," Kerr said. "The contact doesn't match any known weapons profile. It's possible Zorath is waiting for a classification before he decides how to respond." Vexarath was quiet for a long moment. On the main chamber display, the unresolved contact was moving, slowly, but moving. Toward the Soul Fringe, toward Zorath's fleet. "How long until it reaches engagement range?" he asked. "At current speed," Tikar said, "about 30 minutes. Vexarath looked at the display. He looked at it the way he had looked at Tikar's original sensor data, with the patience of an institution that had processed 3 million years of combined species history and was accustomed to having time to think. For the first time in 1,400 years, he was not certain he had time to think. The Shepherd crossed the midpoint of its approach run at the 30-minute mark, and on Meridian Station, Kaelin put on the worn leather jacket. She had taken it off 2 hours in. The war room ran warm when everyone was in it, and it had been over the back of her chair since then. She picked it up, she put it on. She touched the pocket once briefly, feeling the folded parchment there. Reyes noticed. She didn't say anything. Hara noticed. Her boot tapped twice, then stopped. Morrison watched the white marker on the display. "Vasquez is on Section 42 comms," Reyes said. "He's asking if you want a visual feed." "Yes," Kaelin said. "Put it on the secondary display." The secondary display lit with Section 42's external camera mounted on the outer hull, pointing forward along the Shepherd's approach vector. What it showed was dark space and distant stars, and ahead, the faint cluster of lights. That was the Soul Fringe, and beyond that, the barely visible collection of points that was Zorath's fleet, holding position. The camera feed was clean and steady. There was no vibration in it. The ship moved the way a thing moved when it had been very carefully built by people who knew what they were doing and had been given enough time to do it correctly. Vasquez's voice came through the channel, not addressed to anyone in particular, just said to the open air of Section 42. "Look at her go." Ambassador Lisai left her quarters at the 25-minute mark and walked to the council chamber. She did not hurry. The Valley did not hurry as a general practice, and Lisai had found in 89 years that the situations that most demanded hurrying were usually the ones where hurrying made things worse. She walked at her normal pace through the ring station's corridors, past the administrative offices, past the session archive, past the row of species flags that line the approach to the chamber entrance. She had been invited to a classified briefing 17 years ago. She had told no one about it. Not because she had been sworn to silence, she hadn't been exactly, but because she had decided, after that briefing, that what she had seen was humanity's choice to make, not hers to report. Her species observed. They did not intervene in what they observed. They waited to see the whole shape of a thing before they named it. She thought she could see the whole shape now. She entered the chamber and walked to her seat in the Valley delegation section. Vexarath was at his station. Carr was standing nearby. Several hundred delegates were present, which meant the unresolved contact reports had spread further than Vexarath had probably intended. She sat down. She put her slate on the desk in front of her. She opened a new document and began to write a formal statement, the kind the Valley delivered when they had finished observing and were ready to speak. She had been preparing it in her head for 17 years. Vexarath glanced across the chamber at her. She met his eyes. She kept writing. The 20-minute mark hit, and Zorath finally opened the channel again. Admiral Kaelin, his voice was still level. It was the same voice. But something under it had changed. A quality of certainty that had been there before was no longer entirely there, and the space where it had been was not yet filled with anything else. "I am requesting clarification on the nature of the contact now approaching Soul Fringe." Then she reached forward and poured water into her empty mug from the carafe on the table, not coffee, just water, because the coffee had run out and no one had refilled the machine, and she held the mug in both hands and did not drink from it. Please respond. In the war room, Hara looked at Kaylin. Kaylin looked at the display. She was quiet for 8 seconds, and she looked at the secondary display where Section 42's camera showed the approach run, clean and steady, the stars ahead. Do not respond, she said. Hara wrote it in the log. Reyes updated the comms record. Morrison watched the white marker close the remaining distance to the Sol fringe like a man watching something he had spent most of his adult life helping to build move, for the first time under its own power. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the dog tags there. His father had served in the early patrol years. He had always said that the thing you built was never really finished until someone else could see it. 15 minutes out, 2 cars sent a private message from the council ring station to the open diplomatic channel that Lisai monitored. It was 3 words. Is it real? Lisai read the message. She finished the sentence she was writing in her formal statement. Then she responded, "It has always been real. You weren't looking." She set her slate down. In the chamber around her, delegates were standing. The tracking board showed the unresolved contact closing on Sol fringe, and the visual feed from the council's long-range array was now displaying a shape. Not a clear one yet, but a shape. Vexarath stood up from his station. He stood very still, looking at the tracking board, with the particular stillness of someone whose internal model of the universe has just encountered something it cannot place. He had that feeling, the one he had not had in 1,400 years, the one that meant something was happening that he did not have a category for. He had dismissed it when T-Car had brought the data. He was not dismissing it now. 10 minutes out, Hara said, "They're not going to fire." She said it quietly, not as a report, just as a thing she was saying because it had become clear. The fleet was still holding. Zorath's channel was open but silent. The Shepherd's approach was uncontested. "No," Kaylin said. "They're not. How did you know they wouldn't?" Kaylin thought about it. She thought about 17 years of building something that the galaxy had decided in advance was impossible. She thought about the 47 names in her pocket, each one a person who had made the same bet she had, that the galaxy's assumption about what humanity was capable of was wrong, and that the best way to prove it was not to argue but to build. "Because the Shepherd isn't a weapon," she said, "and Zorath runs campaigns. You can't run a campaign against something that isn't threatening you." She set the mug down. "You can only watch." 5 minutes out, the Shepherd cleared Jupiter's interference and gave the galaxy its first clean look. Every sensor array in range received the same profile at the same moment. On Zorath's command cruiser, the alert fired. On the council ring station, the tracking board's unresolved tag disappeared and was replaced by something that had existed in the database for 9,000 years and had never been used. Contact, UN classified. Vexarath looked at the shape on the display. He had 1,400 years of categories. He sat with all of them and found none that fit. He reached for his tea. Cold. He set it back down. T-Car said nothing. He had learned in 89 years when silence was the correct response. This was one of those times. In the war room, Kaylin reached forward and moved the water mug to the center of the table. A small adjustment. She straightened the handle. Her hands needed something ordinary to do. Then she opened the channel. The Shepherd crossed the Sol fringe at 0611, not fast, not loud, just present. The way a fact is present when it has been true for a long time and is only now being seen. The lights along its hull ran full. The power core, at full output, registered on the Council's array as larger than anything in its reference set. On Zorath's bridge, no one spoke. He had won 9 campaigns. He had watched enemy fleets break. He had been on the standing side of that moment enough times that he believed he understood what power looked like. He was looking at his display now and understanding that he had been working from an incomplete picture. The ship had no weapons array he could identify. Its vector was steady. It was not moving to engage. It was simply there, in the space between his fleet and the Sol system, large and lit and requiring no argument. He had demanded compliance. He had received silence. He had brought the fleet. The fleet had nothing to fire at. "All ships," he said. "Hold." Kaylin looked at the display one last time. The white marker clear of the fringe. The red tags, motionless. She opened the broadcast channel. "Now you see them. In the council chamber the words came through at normal volume, not a declaration. Not a threat, the way you say something to someone who has just seen what you already knew. Vexarath heard it. He was still sitting. He did not stand. He looked at the profile on the display, full length, unambiguous, and felt something he had not felt in longer than most current species had held spaceflight, the specific discomfort of being entirely wrong about something he had been entirely certain of. He could not recatalog this. He could not reclassify it. He could not send it back and mark it unresolved. It was on every display in the chamber. Lisai looked up from her statement. She looked at the display. She looked at Vexarath. She wrote the last line. The Valley delegation formally recognizes the Sol system's independent construction capability as proof of species standing, effective immediately. She set the stylus down. Zorath's fleet withdrew 11 minutes after the transmission. No order came from the council. He gave it himself because there was no campaign here. A campaign needed a target. The Shepherd was not a target. It was a proof, and you could not defeat a proof by shooting at it. His ships pulled back on a clean vector. He watched the Shepherd on his display until distance made it small, and then smaller, and then just another bright point among all the others. He did not look away until he had to. In Section 42, Vasquez watched the fleet turn. When the last red tag moved off his camera feed, he put one hand flat on the inner hull, the weld seam he had checked the day it set, and stood like that. Morrison had his hand in his coat pocket, holding his father's dog tags. His father had said the thing you build isn't finished until someone else can see it. They could see it now. Later, Kalen stood at the Meridian Station viewport. Hara was writing up the comms log. Reyes was on a channel to Earth Command. Morrison had gone back to the yard, which was what Morrison did when things were over. The Shepherd was visible from here if you knew where to look. A bright point lit along its whole length, sitting in the space it had earned. She reached into the jacket pocket and took out the charter. The folds had softened until the paper opened almost on its own. She held it in the viewport's light. The names were still clear. All of them. Different hands, different weights, some in careful print and some in running script. Vasquez near the top. Morrison 4 lines down. Names of people who had not lived to see this day. Names of people still in Section 42 right now. Her name at the bottom where she had signed it the day the first Keel section went in. She pressed the charter flat against the glass. The Shepherd was out there. The names faced it. Lisai went to her viewport when the chamber noise rose around her, the sound of an institution encountering something outside its existing rules. The tracking board kept its new entry. Contact UN classified. The council had no category for a species that had built something and said nothing about it, and no one had agreed yet on what the new category should be. TKR filed his follow-up report the next morning. He marked it resolved. Lisai looked out at the ring and the dark beyond it, somewhere past visible range. The Shepherd's lights were still on. She had asked, 17 years ago, what it was for. The answer was in the record now, and in the silence of a fleet that had come to enforce a limit and left without finding one. She had not needed to hear the 3 words on the transmission. She had known for 17 years.